Quiet Nights of Leonardo da Vinci. Sleep Story. A candle burns low beside a cluttered wooden table. Its light reaches only a small part of the room, leaving the corners hidden in shadow. Sheets of paper lie scattered across the surface, some covered in sketches, others filled with lines of hurried handwriting. A feather quill rests beside a drawing of a wing. Nearby, a half-finished machine seems to emerge from the darkness, its purpose uncertain even in the quiet stillness of the night. Outside, the streets have fallen silent. The workshops of the city closed hours ago. Merchants have locked their doors. The sounds of conversation have faded into distant memory. Yet inside this room, one man remains awake. His eyes move from page to page, a sketch of flowing water, a study of a human hand, a design for a flying machine, a question, then another, and somewhere in the stillness between them, a life unfolds. The man sitting at the table is Leonardo da Vinci. History remembers him as a painter, inventor, engineer, scientist, and thinker. His name is attached to some of the most famous works ever created. Yet on nights like this, none of those titles seem particularly important. What remains visible instead is something quieter. A man looking closely, a man unable to stop looking. The candlelight flickers across his notebooks. Thousands of pages will eventually survive him. They contain observations of clouds, mussels, rivers, birds, machines, plants, architecture, light, and motion. Some pages appear almost complete. Others stop abruptly in the middle of a thought, as though another idea arrived before the first could be finished. Even now, one notebook remains open before him. Its margins are crowded with sketches, tiny wheels, geometric forms, human faces. The page itself seems less like a conclusion than a doorway leading somewhere else. Leonardo turns it slowly. The parchment makes a soft sound. Then he begins again. Perhaps this is what surprises many people when they look closely at his life. Not the brilliance, not the achievements, but the movement, the constant motion of curiosity. Answers never seem to settle comfortably beside him. They arrive only briefly before becoming new questions. The flame shifts as a breeze enters through a narrow window. Beyond the glass, the moon hangs above the rooftops. The city sleeps beneath its pale light. Leonardo does not. He rises from the table and crosses the workshop floor. Models of inventions occupy shelves and corners. Some are carefully crafted. Others exist only as rough experiments. Wooden gears sit beside mechanical components. Small sculptures share space with measuring instruments. Nothing appears arranged for display. Everything feels unfinished, not abandoned, simply unfinished, as though the room itself understands that completion was never the primary goal. Leonardo pauses beside a window. Below, darkness covers the narrow streets. Above, the stars remain scattered across the sky. For centuries, people have looked upward at those same lights and wondered. Yet for Leonardo, wonder seems less like a destination and more like a habit, a way of moving through the world. He watches quietly for a moment, then returns to the table. The night continues. Years later, many stories will be told about him. Some will celebrate his paintings. Others will focus on his inventions. Scholars will spend lifetimes studying his notebooks. Historians will attempt to understand the connections between his art and science. Yet few of those stories begin here, in silence, with a man alone beside a candle, a man making notes while everyone else sleeps. The room smells faintly of ink and wood shavings. Nearby, sheets of parchment wait patiently beneath small stones placed to keep them flat. On one page, Leonardo has drawn a series of birds in flight. Their wings appear frozen in different positions, capturing movement one instant at a time. The drawings are beautiful. But beauty may not have been the only purpose. Each sketch feels like an investigation, a quiet attempt to understand how flight itself works. Not merely what birds look like, but how they move, why they move, what hidden principles allow them to rise into the air. The distinction matters. Because throughout his life, Leonardo rarely stopped at appearances. Many people observed, he studied, many people admired, he questioned. The difference seems small until one begins looking through his notebooks. There, every object becomes part of a larger mystery. Water flowing through a stream, the shape of a leaf, the structure of a bone, the curve of a smile. Nothing appears ordinary. Everything contains clues. The candle burns lower. Wax slowly gathers beneath it. Leonardo dips the quill into ink and continues writing. His handwriting moves in its familiar mirrored direction, flowing backward across the page. Historians still debate exactly why he preferred this method. Perhaps it felt natural to him. Perhaps it helped prevent smudging. Whatever the reason, the pages seem to reflect a mind that rarely followed expected paths. Even his writing asks the reader to look differently. Hours pass unnoticed. Outside, clouds drift across the moon. Inside, new sketches emerge. The workshop remains calm, but the mind working within it seems impossibly active. A pulley system appears on one page, an anatomical drawing on another, then a note about water currents, then geometry, then architecture, then light. At first glance, these subjects appear unrelated. Yet Leonardo seemed to see connections where others saw separation. The movement of water and the movement of blood. The structure of tree branches and the structure of rivers. The mechanics of machines and the mechanics of muscles. Patterns repeated themselves throughout nature, and he spent much of his life searching for them. The city beyond the workshop slowly approaches dawn. But before morning arrives, another thought emerges. Leonardo leans back slightly. The page before him remains unfinished. Again. Not because he lacks ideas, perhaps because there are too many. His life contains countless examples of this tendency. Paintings delayed, projects expanded, studies interrupted by new discoveries, curiosity pulling attention in unexpected directions. To some observers, this appears frustrating, to others, fascinating. Yet from within the quiet atmosphere of this room, the pattern feels almost inevitable. Imagine standing beside an endless coastline. Every wave reveals something new. Every horizon suggests another beyond it. Would it be easy to stop exploring? Leonardo rarely did. The flame trembles. The first faint signs of morning approach. Soon the city will awaken. Workers will begin their daily routines. Apprentices will open workshops. Horses will move through crowded streets. Bells will echo across rooftops. But for now, the silence remains, and within it, memories begin to gather. Far from this workshop, far from Milan, far even from Florence. The story begins in a small village called Vinci. Rolling hills stretch beneath the Tuscan sky. Olive trees cover the landscape. Dirt paths wind through fields. Streams move quietly between patches of vegetation. Seasons pass with a rhythm shaped by nature rather than cities. It is here that Leonardo spends his earliest years, long before fame, long before paintings, long before notebooks filled with thousands of observations. The countryside becomes his first classroom. There are no grand lectures, no formal scientific institutions, only fields, water, animals, clouds, and endless opportunities to observe. A child walks slowly beside a stream. He notices how water moves around stones. He watches insects crossing the surface. He studies birds circling overhead. Perhaps he asks questions nobody around him can answer. Not because they lack wisdom, but because certain questions have no simple answers. The shape of clouds, the flight of birds, the patterns hidden within plants. Nature offers endless material for curiosity, and young Leonardo seems unusually willing to spend time looking. Many children are curious, but some possess a particular kind of attention, the kind that lingers, the kind that returns repeatedly to the same mystery. Accounts from later years suggest a boy fascinated by observation, someone drawn toward understanding how things worked rather than simply accepting them. The hills surrounding Vinci provided plenty to examine, morning light changing across valleys, trees bending in the wind, water carving paths through soil, animals moving according to instincts invisible to human eyes. Each scene carried questions, and the questions remained. Years later, when Leonardo filled notebooks with studies of rivers and geological formations, traces of those early landscapes still seemed present. The child observing streams had not entirely disappeared, He had simply acquired more tools. The countryside itself encouraged patience. Unlike cities, rural landscapes reveal their secrets slowly. One must watch, wait, return again. A flower opens gradually. Seasons transform hillsides over months rather than hours. Clouds shift across distant horizons. Patterns emerge only through attention. Leonardo learned attention early, and perhaps that lesson mattered more than any formal education that followed. Morning sunlight begins appearing across the workshop window. The candle has nearly burned out. Leonardo notices neither. His focus remains fixed upon another page, another sketch, another observation. The same habit that once guided a curious child through the hills of Vinci now guides an older man through pages of notes and drawings. Decades separate those moments, yet something essential remains unchanged. A willingness to look closely, a refusal to hurry past mysteries. The room grows brighter, the stars disappear. Birdsong begins somewhere beyond the rooftops. The city prepares to wake. Leonardo continues writing. Ink spreads across parchment. A thought becomes a sketch. The sketch becomes another question. And somewhere between night and morning, between certainty and wonder, the quiet story of his life continues to unfold. The morning arrives almost unnoticed. Sunlight slowly replaces the candle's fading glow, spreading across the workshop floor and revealing details hidden during the night. Dust drifts through narrow beams of light. Wooden models cast longer shadows. The pages scattered across the table suddenly appear less mysterious and more ordinary, as though they belong to any craftsman beginning another day's work. Yet nothing about the collection is ordinary. A visitor entering the room might struggle to understand what they are seeing. One notebook contains studies of human faces, another examines flowing water, a third explores geometric forms. Nearby rests a sketch of gears and mechanical components. The subjects seem disconnected at first glance, assembled without any obvious order. But Leonardo sees a pattern, or perhaps he spends his life searching for one. He closes one notebook and opens another. Outside, the city grows louder. Inside, his attention remains fixed upon observation. For Leonardo, learning rarely begins with grand theories. It begins with looking, again and again, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. That habit had deep roots. Long before he became known throughout Italy, before powerful rulers sought his talents, before famous paintings emerged from his hand, there was simply a young man trying to understand the world around him. The journey from Vinci to Florence would change nearly everything, and yet in some ways it would change nothing at all. The roads leading toward Florence carried travellers through rolling Tuscan landscapes. Merchants moved goods between towns. Farmers tended fields. Pilgrims followed ancient routes. The Renaissance was quietly reshaping Italy, though few people living through it could fully recognize the transformation taking place around them. Ideas were moving, art was changing, knowledge was expanding, and Florence stood near the centre of it all. By the time Leonardo arrived there as a young man, the city hummed with creative energy. Workshops lined its streets. Painters mixed pigments beside sculptors shaping marble. Goldsmiths crafted delicate objects. Architects imagined ambitious projects. Merchants funded new ventures. The city itself felt alive with possibility. For someone like Leonardo, it must have seemed endless. Yet Florence did not immediately recognize him as a future master. He entered the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most respected artists and craftsmen of the time. Verrocchio's workshop was far more than a place for painting. Apprentices learned multiple skills there. Drawing, sculpture, engineering, metalwork, design and observation all existed side by side. The environment suited Leonardo perfectly. A typical day in the workshop was busy and demanding. Apprentices prepared materials, assisted with projects, studied techniques, and practiced endlessly. Success required patience. Mastery came slowly. Yet amid the routine work, opportunities for observation appeared everywhere. Hands shaping clay, light falling across fabric, the movement of workers carrying tools, the structure of muscles beneath skin, every activity became material for study. Leonardo absorbed it all. One can imagine him standing quietly near a window while others focused on assigned tasks. His eyes might follow the way sunlight moved across an object, or how shadows changed shape throughout the afternoon. Small details that others ignored often captured his attention. The workshop taught technique, but it also strengthened a habit he already possessed. Observation first, conclusions later. Perhaps that is why many of Leonardo's drawings still feel remarkably alive today. They are not merely representations of objects, they feel like records of attention. Someone spent time looking, really looking, a fold in fabric, the angle of a neck, the tension in a hand, the direction of a gaze. These details reveal patience more than talent, and patience became one of Leonardo's greatest tools. As the years passed, his abilities became increasingly difficult to ignore. Stories survive suggesting that even as a young apprentice, his skill impressed those around him. One famous account describes his contribution to a painting created within Verrocchio's workshop. According to later tradition, the quality of Leonardo's work surprised his teacher. Whether every detail of the story is accurate matters less than what it represents. People were beginning to notice him, not because he sought attention, but because careful observation leaves traces. The traces were becoming visible. Florence offered endless opportunities to learn. The city's churches contained remarkable works of art. Public squares displayed sculpture. Scholars discussed mathematics and philosophy. Engineers developed new solutions to practical problems. Knowledge seemed to flow through the city much like water through its streets after rain. Leonardo moved among these influences, listening, watching, collecting ideas. Yet even during this period, he never appears fully satisfied with simple mastery. Painting alone did not seem enough. Drawing alone did not seem enough. One discovery led naturally toward another. A painter studying the human body became interested in anatomy. An artist observing light became curious about optics. Someone sketching landscapes began wondering about geology and water. The boundaries separating disciplines felt artificial to him. Nature itself did not divide knowledge into categories. A river did not know whether it belonged to science or art. A bird's wing did not care whether it was being studied by an engineer or a painter. Everything connected, and Leonardo increasingly followed those connections wherever they led. One afternoon, perhaps, he walks through Florence carrying sketches beneath his arm. The streets bustle with activity. Merchants negotiate prices. Craftsmen work in open doorways. Church bells echo across rooftops. Voices rise and fall around him, yet his attention drifts elsewhere. A flock of birds crosses overhead. For a moment he stops, not to admire them, to study them. The distinction appears small, but it would shape much of his life. Others might see beauty. Leonardo saw movement, structure, possibility, questions. How do wings generate lift? How does air support flight? Could those principles be understood? Could they be replicated? The birds disappear beyond the rooftops. The questions remain. Years later, those same questions would fill notebook pages with sketches and mechanical concepts inspired by flight. The seeds often arrived long before the drawings. A curious mind rarely stops collecting. Florence continued changing around him. Powerful families influenced the city's future. Artists competed for commissions. New ideas circulated among scholars and craftsmen. The Renaissance unfolded not as a single event, but as countless conversations and experiments occurring simultaneously. Leonardo existed within that world, yet he often seemed slightly apart from it as well. Many artists sought completion. Leonardo frequently pursued understanding. The difference mattered. A completed painting could satisfy a patron. Understanding had no obvious endpoint. Perhaps that is why so many of his projects remained unfinished. Not because he lacked discipline, not because he lacked ability, but because each project opened new doors. A painting became an investigation into light. Light became an investigation into vision. Vision became an investigation into perception. The chain continued endlessly. In the workshop, morning gradually becomes afternoon. Leonardo examines a drawing, then revises it, then studies the object again, then revises it once more. The process itself appears almost meditative. Observation, adjustment, observation again, no hurry, no final certainty, only gradual refinement. This rhythm followed him throughout life. Even his notebooks reflect it. Ideas evolve across multiple pages. Sketches return years later in altered forms. Problems remain open. Solutions remain provisional. The notebooks feel less like declarations and more like conversations. A conversation between a man and the world he was trying to understand. And the conversation never truly ends. As Florence flourished, Leonardo's reputation slowly expanded. People recognized his talent. Patrons became interested in his work. Opportunities increased. Yet beneath the growing recognition, familiar habits persisted. He continued filling pages with observations, continued studying nature, continued asking questions that extended far beyond traditional artistic concerns. A stream flowing beneath a bridge might capture his attention as effectively as an important commission. A mechanical device could become as fascinating as a painting. Some observers found this unusual, others likely found it frustrating. Patrons generally preferred completed projects. Curiosity often prefers unfinished exploration. Leonardo lived between those forces. The tension never entirely disappeared. One evening, after a long day of work, Florence settles into darkness. Torches illuminate narrow streets. Windows glow softly. Conversations fade behind closed doors. Somewhere within the city, Leonardo sits beside another table covered with sketches. The scene resembles the workshop we visited at the beginning of the story. The years are different. The location is different. Yet the atmosphere remains familiar. Paper, ink, questions. The city sleeps. Leonardo studies another page. A drawing of drapery catches the light. Nearby rests a study of hands. The human hand fascinated him. Its structure, flexibility, and complexity represented far more than an artistic challenge. It was evidence of hidden systems operating beneath the surface of everyday life. Muscles, tendons, bones, movement. Nature concealed remarkable mechanisms within ordinary forms. The more closely he looked, the more mysteries appeared. And perhaps that realization shaped his future more than any single artistic success. Because eventually Florence would no longer be enough. New opportunities awaited elsewhere. New cities, new patrons, new questions. Among those destinations stood Milan, a city that would become one of the most important chapters of his life. There, the scale of his ambitions would expand dramatically. Art would remain central, but engineering, architecture, science, and invention would occupy increasing space within his attention. The notebooks would grow, the questions would multiply, and the quiet search that began among the hills of Vinci would continue into larger and more complex worlds. For now, however, Florence remains illuminated by moonlight. Young Leonardo sits alone. The workshop around him has fallen silent. Tools rest where they were last used. Pigments wait beside unfinished work. The night air enters gently through an open window. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, a bell marks the passing hour. Leonardo barely notices. His focus remains fixed upon a page. A sketch becomes another observation. The observation becomes another possibility. And as darkness settles across the city, curiosity continues its patient work, not demanding answers, only inviting another look, another drawing, another question waiting quietly nearby. The years pass quietly at first, not with sudden transformations or dramatic revelations, but through thousands of small observations accumulating over time. A sketch added to a notebook, a question written in the margin of a page, a new technique practiced until it becomes instinct. The movement feels gradual, almost invisible while it is happening, yet eventually the path leads away from Florence, beyond the familiar streets and workshops, beyond the city that helped shape him, toward Milan. The journey north carries Leonardo through landscapes that continue to attract his attention. Rivers cross the countryside, hills rise and fall against distant horizons. Villages appear briefly before disappearing behind him. Even while travelling, his habit of observation remains unchanged. The world itself seems to function as an endless notebook. Everywhere he looks, there is something worth studying. By the time he arrives in Milan, the city stands among the most powerful centres in Italy. Its rulers seek prestige, influence, and innovation. Grand projects reshape the urban landscape. Engineers design fortifications. Architects imagine ambitious buildings. Artists compete for important commissions. Opportunity fills the air. For Leonardo, Milan becomes more than a new home. It becomes a larger laboratory, a place where many of his interests can exist side by side. The city wakes early. Market squares fill with activity. Horses move through crowded streets. Craftsmen begin their work. Officials carry messages between buildings. The rhythm differs from Florence, yet the energy feels familiar. Leonardo settles into this new environment with characteristic curiosity. Soon he is studying the city itself, its structures, its waterways, its people, its possibilities. One morning, sunlight reflects across a canal while workers unload supplies nearby. The scene appears ordinary enough. Yet Leonardo pauses to watch the movement of water. The current shifts around wooden supports. Small ripples spread outward. Reflections distort and reform. Others continue walking. He remains still. Because even simple water contains mysteries. Its movement fascinates him throughout his life. Again and again, water appears within his notebooks. He studies currents, vortices, waves, erosion, and flow. To many people, water is simply part of the landscape. To Leonardo, it behaves almost like a living language, a system of patterns waiting to be understood. Years later, historians examining his notes would discover page after page dedicated to these observations. Not because water directly increased his fame, not because patrons demanded such studies, but because curiosity led him there, and once curiosity arrived somewhere, it rarely left quickly. His workshop in Milan gradually fills with new projects. Drawing boards lean against walls, mechanical models occupy shelves, sheets of parchment accumulate in growing stacks. Visitors entering the room might struggle to identify a single purpose behind everything they see. Art stands beside engineering, anatomy beside architecture, mathematics beside sculpture. The workshop resembles a crossroads where different forms of knowledge continuously meet. Perhaps that is exactly what Leonardo wanted, a place where ideas could interact freely. One sketch might inspire another. A problem in one field could illuminate a solution elsewhere. Connections matter, and Leonardo notices them everywhere. During this period, his reputation continues expanding. Powerful patrons recognize his abilities. Important commissions arrive. Yet success does not simplify his interests. If anything, it broadens them further. A completed project often generates several new questions. The process repeats endlessly. One afternoon, sunlight pours through high windows while Leonardo studies a collection of plants arranged upon a table. Leaves overlap one another, stems twist toward available light. Tiny variations separate one specimen from the next. He begins drawing. Not quickly, not carelessly. Every line emerges from observation. The goal is not merely accuracy. It is understanding. The difference remains important. Many artists can reproduce appearances. Leonardo wants to understand the structures creating those appearances. Why does a leaf grow in a particular pattern? How does a plant distribute resources? What hidden rules guide development? The drawing becomes an investigation. The investigation becomes another page within a growing archive of questions. Nearby, an unfinished machine rests beneath a cloth. Elsewhere, sketches for artistic commissions wait for attention. Leonardo moves among them all. The transitions seem effortless, at least from the outside. Inside his mind, countless threads likely weave together continuously. A mechanical problem suggests a biological comparison. A study of anatomy influences a painting. Observations of water inspire engineering ideas. Nothing remains isolated. The world appears interconnected, and Leonardo spends much of his life exploring those connections. Evening arrives. The workshop grows quieter. Assistants finish their tasks and depart. Doors close. Footsteps fade. Gradually the familiar silence returns. This is often when some of Leonardo's most interesting work begins. Without interruptions, he can follow questions wherever they lead. The city outside becomes distant. The notebook becomes the centre of attention. A page opens. A new study begins. Tonight, perhaps, the subject is light. A candle burns upon the table. Its glow reaches nearby objects while leaving others hidden in darkness. Leonardo watches carefully. Light fascinates him nearly as much as motion. How does it travel? How does it shape perception? Why do shadows behave as they do? These questions influence both his scientific investigations and his artistic achievements. For him, understanding light is not separate from painting. It is part of painting, part of seeing, part of understanding reality itself. The candle flickers. Shadows shift across the room. He records observations. Simple moments become lasting notes. Centuries later, readers will encounter those pages and glimpse the patience behind them. Patience may be one of the least celebrated aspects of genius, yet it appears everywhere within Leonardo's life. Hours spent studying a hand, days spent refining a drawing, years spent revisiting a question. Curiosity provides direction. Patience provides endurance. Together they shape much of his work. Outside the workshop, Milan settles into darkness. Moonlight touches rooftops and stone walls. Night guards move quietly through streets. Windows extinguish one by one. Still Leonardo remains awake. A notebook lies open before him. Its pages contain sketches unlike anything around him. Flying machines, mechanical systems, structures inspired by observation rather than convention. Many of these ideas will never be built during his lifetime. Some remain incomplete. Others exist only as exploratory studies. Yet their importance extends beyond practical success. They reveal something about the way he thinks. Possibility interests him. Not merely what exists, what might exist. A bird crossing the sky becomes more than a bird. It becomes evidence, a clue, a demonstration that flight is possible. Nature has already solved problems humans still struggle to understand. Leonardo often approaches the world with this mindset. Nature is not simply beautiful, it is instructive. The closer one looks, the more it teaches. This belief guides countless investigations. He studies birds because they fly, water because it moves, muscles because they generate motion, trees because they grow according to patterns. Every observation contributes to a larger effort. Not mastery, understanding. The distinction returns again, quietly, repeatedly, like a familiar current beneath the surface of his life. Years in Milan bring remarkable opportunities, but they also bring increasing complexity. Projects multiply, expectations grow, responsibilities expand, the notebooks become larger, the questions become deeper. Yet the essential rhythm remains surprisingly unchanged. Observe, draw, question, observe again. This cycle repeats across decades, and through repetition, a distinctive way of seeing emerges. Consider a crowded public square. Most people notice movement. Leonardo notices systems. The relationships between movements, the structures beneath appearances, the hidden mechanics shaping visible events. A face becomes a study of expression. An expression becomes a study of emotion. Emotion becomes a study of human nature. One observation leads naturally toward another. The chain rarely ends where it began. This way of thinking influences everything he touches. Art becomes richer because of science. Science becomes more vivid because of art. Neither exists entirely apart from the other. The boundaries dissolve. Late one night, rain begins falling across Milan. Droplets strike rooftops softly. Water gathers along stone streets. The city grows quieter still. Inside the workshop, Leonardo listens, not passively, attentively. Rain interests him, like rivers, like streams, like clouds. Water appears in countless forms, yet follows underlying principles. He rises from the table and approaches a window. Outside, reflections shimmer across wet surfaces. The patterns change continuously. Some people would see only weather. Leonardo sees movement worth studying, even now, even at this hour. The rain continues. He watches for several minutes, then returns to his notebook. A few quick sketches appear on the page, another observation preserved, another small fragment added to an enormous collection. The accumulation fascinates. No single sketch explains Leonardo, no single invention, no single painting. Instead, his life resembles thousands of observations connected across time, a vast network of curiosity stretching from childhood into old age. The pages record more than information, they record attention. And attention reveals character. As midnight passes, the workshop grows still once more. The rain softens, the city sleeps. Leonardo continues writing. Somewhere beyond the immediate concerns of commissions and projects, larger questions remain. Questions about nature, motion, life, perception. Questions that resist simple answers. Questions that continue calling him forward. Soon those questions will lead him toward some of his most ambitious studies yet. Toward the mysteries hidden beneath skin and bone. Toward investigations requiring unusual patience and courage. Toward a deeper exploration of the natural world than most people of his era could imagine. For now, however, the notebook remains open. The rain fades, the candle burns steadily, and another page slowly fills beneath his hand. A sketch, a note, a possibility. One more step into a world that always seems larger the closer he examines it. The notebook remains open long after midnight. Rainwater still clings to the streets outside, reflecting fragments of moonlight between the buildings of Milan. Most windows are dark now. The city has surrendered itself to sleep. Yet inside the workshop another page turns. A new sketch begins. Leonardo pauses for a moment before drawing the first line. The silence around him feels unusually complete. Even the sounds of the city seem distant tonight. On the table rests a branch collected earlier that day. Nothing remarkable about it at first glance. A simple piece of wood, a few leaves, tiny offshoots extending in different directions. Many people would overlook it entirely. Leonardo studies it for nearly an hour, not because the branch is rare, because it is real. Nature often rewards patience. The longer one looks, the more patterns emerge. The branch divides into smaller branches. Those branches divide again. The arrangement appears almost effortless, yet beneath the simplicity lies a hidden order. Leonardo traces the structure with his eyes, then begins drawing. The page slowly fills with lines, observations, measurements, questions. Years earlier, a child wandering the countryside near Vinci might have paused beside a similar tree. Decades later, the habit remains unchanged. The world still offers mysteries. He still notices them. Perhaps this consistency explains so much about his life. Not extraordinary intelligence alone, not artistic talent alone, but a willingness to remain curious long after others have moved on. Many people stop looking once they recognize something. Leonardo often begins looking only after recognition. A tree becomes a puzzle, a river becomes a puzzle, a cloud becomes a puzzle. The familiar never remains entirely familiar. Every answer contains another layer beneath it. The branch joins countless other studies scattered throughout his notebooks. Plants, animals, water, geology, weather, human anatomy. The collection grows larger each year, and gradually a deeper pattern emerges. Leonardo is not merely studying individual objects. He is studying nature itself, the systems connecting everything, the hidden rules shaping visible reality. One afternoon, while walking beyond the crowded streets of Milan, he pauses near flowing water. The stream moves steadily beneath a small bridge. Sunlight dances across the surface. Tiny leaves drift with the current. Leonardo watches. Minutes pass, then more minutes. Most travellers continue on their way. He remains. Water fascinates him because it never stays still. Every moment creates a new shape. Every current interacts with another current. Complex patterns emerge and disappear continuously. Yet beneath the apparent chaos lies structure, order, principles. The challenge is learning how to see them. Back in the workshop, those observations become sketches. Spiraling currents fill notebook pages. Flowing lines overlap one another. Water almost seems alive beneath his pen. The studies reveal more than scientific interest. They reveal admiration, not the admiration of someone seeking control, the admiration of someone seeking understanding. Leonardo rarely approaches nature as a conqueror. He approaches it as a student. Again and again, the natural world becomes his teacher. Birds teach him about flight. Water teaches him about movement. Plants teach him about growth. Light teaches him about perception. The lessons never seem complete, and perhaps that is part of their appeal. One evening, as golden sunlight enters the workshop, Leonardo studies a collection of shells. Their spiraling forms catch the light beautifully. Yet beauty alone does not hold his attention. He examines their structure, the geometry hidden within them, the relationship between form and function, the way natural design solves practical challenges. A shell protects, a wing lifts, a root anchors. Nature appears elegant because it works. The elegance emerges from purpose. This realization quietly influences many of his own ideas. The machines he sketches often resemble living systems. Their components interact like muscles and bones. Their movements echo patterns observed in animals. The distinction between biology and engineering becomes surprisingly thin. Nature provides the blueprint. Leonardo studies the blueprint. As years pass, another fascination deepens: the human body. Few subjects occupy more space within his notebooks. At first, the interest may seem obvious for an artist. Understanding anatomy improves drawing and painting. Accurate knowledge creates convincing figures. But for Leonardo, anatomy quickly becomes something much larger. A painting might begin the investigation. Curiosity carries it much further. The body represents an extraordinary system. Bones support, muscles pull, tendons connect, blood moves, organs perform hidden work. Every movement depends upon countless structures working together. The more he learns, the more remarkable the human form appears. Late at night, surrounded by sketches and notes, Leonardo studies anatomical drawings with extraordinary concentration. The pages reveal layers beneath the surface. Muscles carefully rendered. Bones precisely observed. Mechanical relationships explored with unusual depth. He approaches anatomy much like he approaches rivers or trees. Not as isolated objects, as systems. Everything connects. Everything influences everything else. The hand becomes especially fascinating. It appears throughout his notebooks repeatedly. A hand grasping, a hand resting, a hand in motion. Simple actions conceal astonishing complexity. Each finger depends upon multiple structures. Each movement requires coordination. The ordinary reveals itself as extraordinary once examined closely enough. This idea appears again and again throughout Leonardo's life. The closer one looks, the more wonder appears. Not dramatic wonder, quiet wonder. The kind discovered through patience. One winter evening, a fire crackles softly within the workshop. Outside, cold air moves through the streets of Milan. Inside, Leonardo bends over another notebook. The pages surrounding him contain years of accumulated observation. Some are neat, others crowded. Many appear unfinished. Yet together they form something remarkable. A map of curiosity. Not a complete map. Perhaps no such thing exists. But a record of one person's attempt to understand the world. And what a world it is. Bird wings beside engineering concepts. Anatomical studies beside mathematical diagrams. Water currents beside architectural sketches. The connections multiply endlessly. Sometimes one wonders whether Leonardo himself fully understood where all these paths might lead. Perhaps understanding was never the goal. Perhaps exploration mattered more. A traveller does not always need a final destination. Sometimes the journey itself provides meaning. The notebook pages suggest such a possibility. Again and again, Leonardo investigates subjects that offer no immediate reward. Questions without obvious practical value. Observations unlikely to impress patrons. Studies pursued simply because they seem interesting. Curiosity guides the effort. Nothing more, nothing less. This freedom allows surprising discoveries. While examining nature, Leonardo begins noticing recurring patterns. Branches divide similarly to rivers. Blood vessels resemble branching trees. Certain structures repeat across different scales. The observations remain incomplete, tentative. Yet they hint at something profound. Nature may operate through common principles expressed in different forms. The idea fascinates him. It encourages further observation, further comparison, further questions. Night after night the search continues. The workshop becomes both laboratory and sanctuary, a place where distractions fade, a place where ideas can develop slowly. Hours pass unnoticed. The city sleeps beyond the walls. Leonardo remains awake beside another page. One sketch leads to another. One question leads to another. The rhythm becomes familiar, comforting even. Outside, seasons change. Years advance. Political fortunes rise and fall. Cities evolve. Yet certain scenes repeat throughout his life. A table, a notebook, a quiet room, a mind still searching. Sometimes the greatest mysteries are not hidden in distant places. They exist within ordinary things, a leaf, a river, a hand. Leonardo seems to understand this instinctively. The extraordinary often hides inside the familiar. One simply needs to look long enough. As midnight approaches once again, he closes a notebook and opens another. Fresh pages wait patiently. The possibilities feel endless. Somewhere nearby rests a study of birds. Elsewhere, a drawing of a human skull. Another page contains notes about flowing water. Together they represent different chapters of the same search, different paths toward understanding, different windows into nature's design, and still the questions remain. Not troubling questions, not urgent questions, quiet questions, companions rather than problems. They sit beside him in the candlelight, waiting, inviting another observation, another sketch, another careful look. Soon those questions will carry Leonardo even further, toward works that future generations will celebrate, toward paintings whose expressions seem almost alive, toward achievements that ensure his name will never entirely fade. Yet even there, beneath fame and accomplishment, the same familiar curiosity continues its patient work. The curiosity of a child watching water move around stones, the curiosity of a young apprentice studying light across a room, the curiosity of a man sitting alone after midnight, turning another page. And somewhere within that endless process, the quiet mystery of Leonardo's life continues to unfold. The pages continue to accumulate, stack upon a stack of sketches, observations, measurements, and unfinished thoughts fill shelves, tables, and wooden chests. Some sheets are carefully organized. Others seem placed wherever space could be found. Looking across the collection, one senses less a completed archive, and more a landscape still under construction, a landscape built from curiosity. Night settles gently over Milan once again. The workshop grows quiet. The last assistants have departed. Tools rest where they were left. The sounds of the city fade beyond thick stone walls. Only a candle remains awake beside Leonardo. Its flame illuminates a painting in progress. The surface catches the light softly. A face begins emerging from layers of careful work. The expression feels almost alive. Not frozen, not fixed. Alive. Leonardo studies it without touching the brush. Minutes pass, then more. For him, painting is never merely painting. Every face contains questions. Every expression conceals subtle complexities. What creates emotion? How does thought reveal itself through appearance? Why does one smile feel different from another? Such questions occupy his attention as much as colour or composition. He watches, adjusts, observes again. The process resembles scientific investigation as much as artistic creation. Perhaps that is why his paintings often seem so unusual. He does not simply paint people, he studies them. The difference lingers within the finished work. A visitor entering the workshop might notice how much time Leonardo spends looking rather than painting. Hours of observation often precede a few moments of action. He examines the fall of light across a cheek, the shape of a shadow near the eye, the way expression shifts between moments. Nothing appears rushed. The painting develops gradually, almost like a living thing, layer by layer, question by question. Outside, moonlight spreads across the rooftops of Milan. Inside, Leonardo continues working. Yet even while painting, other interests remain nearby. A notebook rests open beside the easel. Its pages contain sketches unrelated to the portrait. Mechanical studies, anatomical observations, notes about water. The boundaries separating these subjects seem almost non-existent. Everything belongs to the same larger search. Everything contributes. This way of thinking becomes increasingly visible throughout his life. Art and science do not compete for his attention. They strengthen one another. Anatomy improves painting. Painting sharpens observation. Observation deepens scientific inquiry. The cycle continues endlessly. One discipline illuminates another. A study of muscles helps create more convincing figures. A study of light improves understanding of vision. Knowledge flows between subjects like water connecting rivers. Leonardo follows wherever it leads. One evening, while reviewing sketches, he pauses before a drawing of the human eye. The page contains careful notes and diagrams. Light enters. Images form. Perception begins. The mechanism fascinates him. How does sight actually work? How does the mind transform light into experience? These questions feel remarkably modern. Yet Leonardo pursues them centuries earlier, not through abstract theory alone, through observation, experiment, patience. The eye itself becomes a mystery worthy of years of study, and perhaps that reveals something important. Many people search for answers to large questions. Leonardo often begins with small ones. How does a shadow form? How does a bird turn in flight? How does a smile emerge? The small questions eventually lead toward larger ones, step by step, quietly, without announcement. The workshop door remains closed. The city sleeps. Leonardo turns another page. A new sketch appears. This time the subject is motion. Movement fascinates him almost as much as structure. The world rarely stands still. Water flows, animals move, clouds drift, people walk, gesture, work, and rest. Everything changes continuously. Capturing that change becomes one of his lifelong challenges. A still image must somehow suggest movement. A drawing must imply life. The task requires extraordinary observation. Fortunately, observation remains his greatest habit. Years pass. Projects come and go. Some succeed brilliantly. Others remain unfinished. Many evolve into forms different from their original intentions. Yet through all these changes, Leonardo continues filling notebooks. The notebooks themselves become companions, portable collections of thought, places where ideas can wait patiently until he returns. A question written today may receive attention years later. A sketch abandoned in one city may reappear in another. Nothing is entirely lost. The conversation continues across decades. Late one night, Leonardo sits beside an open window. The air feels cool. Stars fill the sky above Milan. For a while he simply watches. No drawing, no writing, only observation. The silence feels comfortable, perhaps because silence creates space for noticing. The world often reveals itself most clearly when nothing demands immediate attention. A distant sound echoes through the city, then fades. The stars remain. Leonardo studies them quietly. Human beings have looked upward for thousands of years, wondering, questioning, searching. He joins a tradition far older than himself, yet his curiosity possesses a distinctive quality. He rarely accepts mystery as an endpoint. Mystery becomes an invitation to look closer, to investigate, to learn. The stars eventually disappear behind drifting clouds. He returns to the table. The notebook awaits. Another page, another observation. The rhythm continues. As his reputation grows, so does the scale of his ambitions. Large projects attract his attention. Complex engineering challenges emerge. Architectural ideas expand. New possibilities appear constantly. Yet the most remarkable aspect may be how little success changes his essential nature. Recognition arrives. Curiosity remains. Fame increases. Questions remain. Achievements accumulate. Wonder remains. The same habits visible in childhood continue guiding him. This consistency gives his life an unusual coherence. The subjects change. The cities change. The years change. but the search itself remains recognizable. One afternoon, sunlight fills the workshop while Leonardo examines a collection of gears arranged upon a table, different sizes, different shapes, different purposes. He turns one slowly with his hand. The movement transfers through the system. One gear influences another, then another. The mechanical relationship fascinates him, because once again he sees a pattern. Nature often works similarly. Structures interacting, forces transferring, systems cooperating. Machines and living organisms may appear different, yet both reveal underlying principles, connections, relationships, patterns. Again, the same theme emerges. Everything links together. The more closely he observes, the more connections appear. And perhaps this realization shapes many of his greatest insights. Not isolated facts, relationships between facts, not separate disciplines, shared principles. The world becomes increasingly unified the longer he studies it. As midnight approaches, the candle burns lower, the workshop falls silent. A nearly completed painting rests nearby. Its expression seems suspended between certainty and mystery. Viewers centuries later will still debate what they see. A smile, a thought, a secret. Perhaps the painting endures because it reflects something Leonardo understood deeply. Human beings remain difficult to fully explain. Nature remains difficult to fully explain. The world contains layers, and beneath every layer waits another. This realization never appears to discourage him. If anything, it energizes him. The unknown remains vast. There is always more to learn, more to observe, more to question. The night deepens. Leonardo closes one notebook and reaches for another. Its pages contain engineering concepts unlike anything surrounding him. Ideas reaching beyond the present, possibilities extending toward the future. Some will never be built. Others will influence generations yet to come. The sketches seem almost impatient with the limitations of their era, and soon those ambitions will occupy more of his attention than ever before. Machines, structures, inventions, dreams of movement and flight. The search is about to widen once again. And as always, it begins with a quiet observation, a simple question, a blank page waiting beneath candlelight. The candlelight trembles gently across the page. A fresh sheet of parchment lies before Leonardo. The surface is empty except for a few faint guidelines drawn moments earlier. Around him, the workshop remains silent. Paintings rest against walls. Models occupy shelves. Notebooks wait in uneven stacks. Yet tonight his attention belongs elsewhere, not to a portrait, not to anatomy, not even to water. His eyes follow the memory of something he observed earlier that day. A bird. Nothing unusual. Merely a bird crossing the sky above the city. A brief movement. Gone within seconds. But the image remained. Now it returns. The wing rising. The wing turning. The effortless balance between air and motion. Leonardo lowers the quill. A sketch begins. Another wing. Then another. Measurements appear beside the drawings. Angles, proportions, observations. The page fills gradually. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, a familiar question quietly unfolds once again. How does nature accomplish what humans cannot? For centuries, people dreamed of flight. Stories filled with wings, soaring figures, and impossible journeys circulated throughout cultures across the world. Yet dreams alone offered little understanding. Leonardo wanted more than dreams. He wanted to understand the mechanism, the principle, the hidden process allowing a creature to leave the ground and remain suspended in air. And so he watched birds, again and again, not casually, patiently. A bird landing, a bird turning, a bird climbing against the wind. Every movement became evidence, a clue. One afternoon, standing beyond the crowded streets of Milan, he observed several birds circling above an open field. Warm currents lift them higher, their wings barely move. The sight captures his attention immediately. Most observers would describe the scene as beautiful. Leonardo undoubtedly found it beautiful too, but beauty was only the beginning. His mind follows a different path. Why does the bird rise? What supports it? How does it control direction? How does balance function during flight? The questions multiply rapidly. Soon they occupy entire pages. The notebooks begin filling with sketches inspired by observation. Some resemble wings, others resemble mechanical structures. Ideas evolve, expand, transform. Many remain theoretical, some appear impractical by modern standards. Yet that misses an important point. The value lies not merely in success, the value lies in the attempt to understand. Leonardo's studies of flight reveal the same pattern visible throughout his life. Observation first, imagination second. He does not begin with fantasy. He begins with reality. Nature demonstrates what is possible. Only then does he explore how similar principles might be applied elsewhere. The workshop gradually becomes crowded with unusual designs, mechanical wings, systems of pulleys, structures intended to interact with air. Visitors encountering these sketches might struggle to understand them. Some likely appeared strange even to Leonardo's contemporaries. Yet within the drawings one can sense genuine effort, a sincere attempt to learn from nature rather than simply imitate it. The distinction matters, because Leonardo rarely treats nature as an obstacle, he treats it as a teacher. Again and again the same relationship appears. Nature demonstrates, Leonardo studies, nature reveals a pattern, Leonardo records it. The process continues throughout decades. One winter evening, rain taps softly against the workshop windows. The room feels smaller tonight, warmer, more intimate. Leonardo sits surrounded by sketches of machines. Some pages contain gears, others contain mechanical systems designed to transfer force. A few appear astonishingly complex. Yet the atmosphere remains calm. No dramatic breakthrough occurs. No sudden revelation. Only steady work. The slow accumulation of understanding. Perhaps this is another aspect of Leonardo often overlooked. Many people imagine discoveries arriving in brilliant flashes. His notebook suggests something different. Patience, observation, revision, a willingness to spend years exploring a question. The questions about flight continue, so do questions about movement itself. Machines fascinate him because they reveal relationships. One force becomes another, motion transfers, energy changes form. The same underlying curiosity appears once more. Not merely what happens, why it happens, how it happens. A gear turning another gear seems simple enough, yet simplicity often conceals complexity. Leonardo notices both. On one page he sketches mechanical systems for lifting heavy objects. On another he explores transportation concepts. Elsewhere he studies military engineering, architecture and hydraulics. The range feels astonishing, yet somehow interconnected, because beneath every project lies the same habit of mind: observation, investigation, pattern recognition, a search for principles hidden beneath appearances. Years pass. The notebooks grow thicker, the stacks become larger, new cities, new commissions, new responsibilities. Still, the questions continue, and so does the work. One morning, sunlight enters through a high window, while Leonardo examines a small mechanical model resting upon a table. Wooden components fit together carefully. The design remains unfinished. Several pieces require adjustment. Others may never be completed at all. Yet he studies it attentively. Failure does not seem to discourage him greatly. Neither does incompletion. The model simply becomes another step, another experiment, another attempt to understand. This attitude allows unusual freedom. Many people fear unfinished work because it suggests imperfection. Leonardo appears surprisingly comfortable with imperfection, not because he lacks standards, because exploration matters more than certainty. An unfinished project still teaches. A failed design still reveals information. Every attempt contributes something. The notebooks preserve these lessons, page after page, year after year. The collection becomes extraordinary not merely because of what Leonardo knew, but because of what he was willing to question. One evening, while reviewing older notes, he discovers a sketch created years earlier. The idea remains incomplete. The page contains only fragments, a few measurements, partial diagrams, scattered observations. Another person might set it aside permanently. Leonardo studies it again. Fresh possibilities emerge. New questions appear. The conversation resumes. This ability to return to old ideas repeatedly becomes one of his defining characteristics. Nothing truly disappears. An observation made today may become meaningful years later. A sketch ignored for a decade may suddenly connect with a new insight. Knowledge accumulates gradually, like water filling a reservoir, like branches extending from a tree. Growth rarely follows a straight line. His notebooks reflect this beautifully. They feel alive, ideas moving, changing, evolving, never entirely fixed. The workshop itself seems to mirror the process. Models in different stages of completion occupy every available space. Some projects advance rapidly, others pause indefinitely. Everything exists within motion. Everything remains open. Late at night, Leonardo walks slowly between the tables. Moonlight enters through the windows. The room appears transformed. Machines cast long shadows. Pages gleam softly beneath the pale light. The atmosphere feels almost dreamlike, yet everything within it emerged from careful observation. Reality remains the foundation. Even the boldest ideas begin with something seen: a bird, a river, a hand, a cloud. The ordinary continues inspiring the extraordinary. And perhaps that reveals something essential about Leonardo. He does not search for mystery in distant places. He finds it within familiar things. The world itself contains enough wonder. One only needs patience to notice it. The years in Milan bring remarkable achievements, but they also reveal a subtle truth. No accomplishment fully satisfies his curiosity. Each success opens another door. Each answer reveals another question. The process never ends, and perhaps he never wants it to, because curiosity has become more than a habit, more than an interest. It has become a way of living, a way of moving through the world. The night grows quieter. A final candle burns beside an open notebook. Leonardo writes a few more observations before setting the quill aside. Tomorrow will bring new work, new questions, new possibilities. Yet somewhere beneath all of them remains the same quiet search that began long ago among the hills of Vinci. The search continues, and soon it will face one of its most persistent companions, the unfinished, the incomplete, the projects that remained forever in progress, the ideas that refused to settle into final form. For Leonardo, these unfinished paths may reveal just as much as the completed ones, perhaps even more. The workshop is unusually quiet tonight. No assistants move between tables, no visitors arrive with requests or commissions. Even the city beyond the walls seems subdued, as though the world itself has chosen silence for a few hours. Leonardo sits alone beside a collection of unfinished work. A painting rests against one wall. Several notebooks lie open nearby. Mechanical sketches cover part of the table. A sculpture study remains incomplete. At first glance, the scene might appear disappointing. So much work, so much effort, and yet so much unfinished. But Leonardo does not seem troubled by their presence. In fact, unfinished things accompany him throughout nearly every stage of his life. They sit quietly beside his greatest achievements, like familiar companions. A visitor looking only at completed masterpieces would miss this entirely. The paintings celebrated by future generations represent only a small portion of his creative world. Around them exists a much larger landscape of investigations, experiments, studies, revisions and possibilities that never fully reached a final form, and perhaps that landscape tells us something important. The candlelight drifts across a notebook page. Leonardo studies an old drawing. Years have passed since he first created it. The paper has aged slightly, the ink has softened, yet the question behind the sketch remains alive. He examines it once more. Not because it succeeded, because it still interests him. Many people seek completion. Completion provides certainty. A finished project offers closure. The story ends. Leonardo often seems less interested in endings. His attention naturally gravitates toward beginnings, toward possibilities, toward the next question waiting beyond the current one. This tendency creates both opportunities and challenges. Some patrons undoubtedly wished he would finish work more quickly. Some projects expanded far beyond their original scope. Others evolved so dramatically that completion became increasingly difficult. Yet from Leonardo's perspective, the situation may have felt different. Each project was not merely an object to finish. It was a path to explore. And exploration rarely follows a straight line. One afternoon, sunlight enters through the workshop windows while Leonardo studies a painting already admired by others. Most artists might consider the work complete. The composition succeeds, the details satisfy, the patron is pleased, the project could end. Leonardo notices something else, a subtle transition of light, a shadow that might be improved, a possibility not yet explored. The painting remains on the easel. Days pass, then weeks. The investigation continues. To outside observers, this can appear frustrating. To Leonardo, it may have felt natural, because the goal was never simply finishing. The goal was understanding. And understanding rarely announces its completion. A river does not suddenly reveal all its secrets. Neither does anatomy. Neither does light. Neither does human expression. The deeper one looks, the more remains to be discovered. Night settles over the city. Leonardo turns another page. The notebook contains ideas abandoned years earlier. At least they appear abandoned. A flying machine concept. Partial calculations. Observations interrupted midway through a thought. Most people would file such pages away permanently. Leonardo revisits them, again and again. The old questions continue speaking to him. Sometimes a new observation illuminates an old problem. Sometimes a forgotten sketch suddenly suggests a new direction. Knowledge grows through connections, and connections often require time, years, sometimes. The notebooks preserve this process beautifully. They reveal a mind unwilling to discard curiosity simply because immediate answers remain unavailable. One page leads nowhere, until it leads somewhere. A sketch seems incomplete, until another sketch appears beside it. The conversation continues across decades, like a river finding its course through changing terrain. One winter evening, cold air presses against the workshop windows. A fire burns quietly nearby. Leonardo sits surrounded by work representing different periods of his life. Some projects belong to recent months, others trace back many years. The room resembles a physical map of curiosity, ideas overlapping, questions intersecting, paths crossing unexpectedly. He moves from one project to another, not randomly, guided by interest, guided by observation, guided by whatever question feels most alive at that moment. This pattern confuses some people. Modern life often rewards specialization, focus, narrow expertise. Leonardo seems drawn toward breadth, not because he lacks commitment, because the world itself appears interconnected. The flight of birds connects to engineering. Engineering connects to mathematics. Mathematics connects to art. Art connects to perception. Perception connects to anatomy. Every subject eventually touches another. The boundaries become difficult to maintain, and Leonardo rarely tries. One night, long after midnight, he studies a collection of sketches depicting flowing water. The pages contain whirlpools, currents, and intricate patterns. Nearby rests an anatomical drawing. Elsewhere sits an engineering design. Different subjects. Yet something about them feels related. Movement, structure, pattern. The same ideas appear repeatedly in different forms. Water circulates, blood circulates, mechanical forces circulate. Nature seems to favour recurring principles. Leonardo notices and continues looking. Years pass. Political landscapes shift. Patrons change. Cities transform. Some opportunities disappear. Others emerge unexpectedly. Life moves forward, yet certain scenes remain remarkably consistent. A notebook, a table, a quiet room, a question. The repetition feels comforting, almost timeless. The external world changes constantly. Curiosity remains. One evening, while reviewing old notebooks, Leonardo encounters a page filled with observations made decades earlier. The handwriting belongs to a younger version of himself. The questions feel familiar, almost surprisingly familiar, because despite the passing years, Many of them remain unresolved, not through failure, through depth. Some questions simply grow larger the longer one examines them. Nature continues revealing additional layers. Human understanding continues expanding. The search continues. Perhaps this realization brings a certain peace. Not every mystery requires resolution. Not every path requires an endpoint. A question can remain valuable even while unanswered. Leonardo's notebook suggests this repeatedly. Many pages contain investigations rather than conclusions, observations rather than declarations, possibilities rather than certainties. The collection feels wonderfully human because of it, not a monument to perfection, a record of exploration, a record of attention, a record of one person's lifelong attempt to understand the world. Outside, moonlight settles across the rooftops. Inside, Leonardo continues reading. The pages whisper quietly across the table as he turns them. Each notebook preserves moments from different stages of life, different cities, different interests, different seasons. Yet together they reveal remarkable continuity. The same curiosity visible in childhood remains present decades later. Older now, wiser perhaps, but still searching, still observing, still wondering. The candle burns lower. Its flame flickers gently. Nearby rests a project unlikely to be completed exactly as imagined. Leonardo studies it without disappointment. The work has already served its purpose. It has taught him something, led him somewhere, opened another door. Completion is only one measure of value, discovery is another, and discovery fills nearly every chapter of his life. As the night deepens, the workshop feels less like a place of unfinished work and more like a place of ongoing work. The distinction matters. Nothing here is truly abandoned. The conversation continues. Questions remain active. Possibilities remain open. The search remains alive. And perhaps that is why so many unfinished projects still fascinate people centuries later. They reveal Leonardo not as a finished legend, but as a human being still in motion, still learning, still exploring, still standing at the edge of another mystery. Soon the years ahead will bring new reflections, new challenges, and a quieter chapter of life. The restless energy of youth will gradually soften. The notebooks will continue. The questions will remain. But time itself will begin introducing a different kind of perspective, one that comes only after decades spent observing the world. The years move differently now, not slower exactly, but quieter. The urgency that often accompanies youth has begun to soften around the edges. The long roads between cities feel more familiar. The endless cycle of commissions, projects and ambitions no longer carries quite the same intensity. Time continues forward, as it always has. Yet Leonardo increasingly seems to observe its passage with the same attention he once reserved for rivers, birds and clouds. Another evening settles across Italy. The sky darkens gradually. Shadows lengthen across stone walls. Somewhere in the distance, bells mark the passing hour. Leonardo sits beside a window. A notebook rests open on his lap. For a while he does not write. He simply watches. The fading light interests him. It always has. Even now, after decades spent studying illumination and shadow, the transition between day and night continues to hold his attention. Perhaps because it never happens exactly the same way twice. The colours shift. The atmosphere changes. The world transforms slowly before his eyes. And Leonardo notices. He has spent much of his life noticing. That habit remains. If anything, it grows stronger. The questions continue too, but their character begins to change. Earlier in life, many questions pointed outward. How does flight work? How does water move? How do muscles create motion? Now another kind of curiosity occasionally appears, a quieter curiosity, one shaped by memory. The notebooks surrounding him contain decades of observation, entire portions of a lifetime preserved in ink. Thousands upon thousands of pages, sketches, ideas, experiments, thoughts, questions. Sometimes he turns through them slowly, not searching for answers, simply revisiting old paths. An observation made years earlier, a sketch created in another city, a project begun long ago. The pages become companions, records of time itself. One autumn evening, Leonardo studies a notebook filled with drawings from many years before. The handwriting appears slightly different. The lines possess the confidence of youth. The questions seem ambitious, restless. He smiles faintly. Not because the younger man was wrong, because the younger man was familiar. The same curiosity remains visible on every page, the same desire to understand, the same willingness to look closely. Decades separate the sketches, yet the person behind them feels remarkably consistent. Outside, leaves move gently through a courtyard. The air has grown cooler. Seasons continue their endless rhythm. Spring follows winter. Summer follows spring. The cycle repeats. Leonardo watches the movement thoughtfully. Nature never stops teaching. Even now, perhaps especially now. Age often changes what people notice. Certain details become more important. Others fade. Leonardo still studies the world, but increasingly he seems interested in patterns stretching across longer periods of time. Growth, change, transformation. The way small observations accumulate into understanding. The way years shape a life. One morning, sunlight enters through a window while he reviews studies of plants created decades apart. The differences are subtle, yet visible. His observations have deepened. His drawings have evolved. His understanding has expanded, not through sudden revelation, through patience, through repetition, through years of attention. The realization feels significant. Most meaningful understanding arrives slowly, like a tree growing, like water shaping stone, like knowledge gathering one observation at a time. Leonardo's life offers countless examples. The notebooks themselves prove it. No single page explains the world, yet thousands of pages reveal remarkable insights. The accumulation matters. A quiet evening settles around him. The workshop is different now than those of earlier years. Different cities, different circumstances, different responsibilities. Yet familiar objects remain nearby. Pens, ink, paper, sketches, questions. The essentials have changed very little. He reaches for another notebook. The pages contain anatomical studies, detailed observations created through extraordinary patience, muscles, bones, structures hidden beneath the surface of ordinary life. Leonardo examines them carefully. The drawings remain impressive, yet what seems most striking is not technical skill, it is attention. Someone looked very closely. Someone cared enough to spend countless hours understanding. Attention leaves traces. The notebooks are filled with them. Every page testifies to the act of looking, really looking. And perhaps that is one of the quiet lessons woven throughout Leonardo's life. The world reveals itself differently depending on how carefully one observes. Most people see enough to navigate daily life. Leonardo often looked further, not because he possessed special access to reality, because he invested unusual attention. The difference changed everything. Late at night, while reviewing old sketches, he pauses beside a drawing of flowing water. The image immediately feels familiar. Water appears everywhere throughout his notebooks. Decades pass. The fascination remains. He studies the page again. The currents twist and spiral. Patterns emerge. Patterns disappear. The drawing feels almost alive, perhaps because water itself never truly stands still. In some ways, curiosity resembles water, always moving, always seeking new paths, always finding connections. Leonardo's curiosity certainly behaves that way. From childhood onward, it flows through every chapter of his life. Art, science, engineering, anatomy, nature. The boundaries dissolve. Everything becomes part of the same larger search. A search not necessarily for final answers, a search for understanding. An understanding, he seems to realize, is never entirely complete. One winter afternoon, clouds drift across the sky while Leonardo sits near a fire. The room feels warm, comfortable, quiet. A notebook rests close beside him. For once, he's not actively working. Instead, he reflects. Not formally, not dramatically, simply allowing memory to wander. Florence, Milan, the countryside around Vinci, workshops filled with apprentices, long nights spent sketching, countless observations recorded across countless pages. Entire decades pass through his thoughts. Yet when viewed together, a surprising pattern emerges. The achievements matter, the paintings matter, the inventions matter. But beneath all of them exists something even more consistent: curiosity. The simple desire to understand. Again and again it appears, the constant thread running through everything else. Without curiosity, many of the paintings would never exist. Without curiosity, the notebooks would remain empty. Without curiosity, the observations would never have begun. It shaped nearly every chapter of his life, and even now it remains present. Perhaps quieter, but still present. Outside, snow begins falling lightly. The flakes drift past the window. Leonardo watches them. Their movement feels gentle, unhurried. For several minutes he says nothing, does nothing, simply observes. A familiar activity, one practiced for a lifetime. The snow continues. Each flake follows its own path. Tiny variations, tiny patterns, tiny mysteries. The world remains endlessly detailed, endlessly interesting, endlessly worthy of attention. The realization brings a subtle comfort. One does not need grand discoveries every day. Wonder often lives within ordinary moments. A leaf, a shadow, a bird, a snowfall. Leonardo seems to understand this deeply. Perhaps that understanding represents a kind of wisdom, not certainty, not mastery, something quieter, a willingness to remain attentive, a willingness to remain curious, even after decades of searching, even after decades of learning. The evening deepens. The fire burns lower. The room grows still. Leonardo reaches for a notebook once more. Its pages wait patiently. A blank space remains near the end. Enough room for another observation, another sketch, another question. There is always another question, and somehow that seems perfectly acceptable, perhaps even beautiful. The night settles gently around him. The notebook opens. The pen touches paper. The room is quiet enough to hear the scratching of a pen across paper. Leonardo sits beside a table worn smooth by years of use. The surface bears faint marks left by countless sketches, measurements, and revisions. Nearby, notebooks are stacked in uneven piles. Some are newly written. Others have travelled with him across decades. Outside, the night remains still. Inside, memory begins to move. There comes a point in many lives when looking forward and looking backward begin to occupy the same space. The future remains present, but the past becomes larger. Not heavier, simply larger. For Leonardo, the past exists everywhere around him. It fills shelves, it rests inside notebooks, it lives within unfinished sketches and completed paintings alike. Every page contains a moment once observed. Every drawing preserves an instant of attention. Together they form something remarkable. Not merely a collection of ideas, a record of a life spent looking closely. The candlelight falls across an old notebook. Leonardo opens it slowly. The pages reveal familiar subjects: birds, water, human figures, mechanical studies, plants, cloud formations. The range is extraordinary. Yet what feels most striking is not the variety. It is the consistency. The same curiosity appears everywhere, a curiosity that never seems fully satisfied. One page leads to another, one observation leads to another. The search continues across years as naturally as breathing. He turns another page. A study of flowing water appears. The drawing instantly recalls countless hours spent beside rivers and canals, watching, recording, learning. Water accompanied him throughout life, not because it was useful for every project, because it fascinated him. The currents always seemed to contain hidden lessons, patterns within patterns, structures concealed beneath movement. Even now, decades later, the fascination remains. Some questions never lose their power. Perhaps that is why certain notebooks remain close at hand, not because they contain completed answers, because they contain living questions, questions still capable of inspiring thought, questions still capable of inviting another look. Outside the window, Moonlight settles softly across the landscape. Leonardo pauses for a moment. The silence feels familiar, comfortable. Over the years, he has spent countless nights like this, alone with notebooks, alone with ideas, alone with observations gathered from the world around him. Yet solitude rarely appears lonely in these moments. The pages provide company. The questions provide company. The search itself provides company. A sketch created years ago suddenly connects to a newer observation. An old problem reveals a different angle. A forgotten note becomes meaningful once again. The conversation never truly ends. Tea simply changes form. One evening, while reviewing anatomical studies, Leonardo notices how many pages remain unfinished. A hand only partially drawn. Notes interrupted midway through a thought. Measurements waiting for completion. Yet rather than appearing incomplete, the pages feel alive, open, active, still participating in the search. This quality appears throughout much of his work. The notebooks rarely feel final, they feel ongoing, as though curiosity itself resists endings. And perhaps that is true. The desire to understand often survives individual answers. Solve one mystery and another appears. Learn one principle and a deeper question emerges. Leonardo experienced this pattern repeatedly, throughout art, throughout science, throughout every subject he explored. The more he learned, the larger the world seemed. Not smaller, larger. The realization never discouraged him. Instead, it seems to have deepened his sense of wonder. A gentle breeze enters through the window. Several loose pages shift slightly upon the table. Leonardo steadies them with one hand. The movement draws his attention to another notebook nearby. This one contains studies from many different years. The pages feel almost like a conversation between different versions of himself. A younger Leonardo asks a question. An older Leonardo revisits it. An observation made in Florence reappears years later in Milan. A sketch begun in one chapter of life finds continuation in another. Time weaves everything together. The notebooks preserve the threads. Sometimes historians focus on the finished achievements, the famous paintings, the celebrated designs, the extraordinary reputation. All of these matter. Yet sitting here beside the notebooks, another picture emerges. A quieter picture. The portrait of a man engaged in a lifelong dialogue with the world. A man who remained curious long after success might have encouraged complacency. A man who continued asking questions when others might have settled for certainty. The distinction feels important, because certainty often closes doors. Curiosity opens them. Leonardo consistently chooses the open door, again and again. The candle burns lower. Its flame casts long shadows across the table. The notebooks seem almost endless. Thousands of pages. Thousands of observations. Yet even now, new thoughts continue appearing. New connections continue forming. The work remains unfinished because understanding remains unfinished. Nature still contains mysteries. Human beings still contain mysteries. The world continues offering more than any one lifetime can fully explore. Perhaps Leonardo understands this better than most. One afternoon, years earlier, he had studied the branches of a tree. Later he compared those branching forms to rivers. Still later, similar patterns appeared within anatomical studies. The connection fascinated him. Nature repeating itself. Structures echoing one another across different scales. The observation never fully leaves him. Even now, looking back across decades of work, such connections appear everywhere. Water resembles blood. Roots resemble branches. Mechanical systems resemble biological systems. The world feels woven together. A vast network of relationships waiting to be noticed. Leonardo spent much of his life noticing them. Night deepens. The candlelight grows softer. The room feels suspended between memory and observation, between past and present. Leonardo closes one notebook and opens another. The pages contain nothing particularly famous. No celebrated masterpiece. No revolutionary design. Just notes. Small observations. Simple sketches. Yet these pages may reveal as much as any great achievement, because they show what captured his attention when no audience was watching. What interested him when there was no reward, no recognition, no commission, only curiosity? The pages reveal a man genuinely fascinated by the world, and perhaps that fascination remains the most remarkable thing of all. The years have brought success, they have brought challenges, they have brought unfinished work and celebrated accomplishments alike, yet through every chapter curiosity remains, steady, persistent, quiet, a companion present from childhood onward. Outside, the stars continue their slow movement across the sky. Inside, Leonardo writes a few final notes. The handwriting moves carefully across the page, a thought preserved. Another observation added to the collection. The notebook remains open, the conversation remains unfinished, and soon, as the years draw further toward their conclusion, another perspective will emerge. A perspective shaped not by ambition or discovery alone, but by the long view, the view that comes from spending a lifetime watching, questioning, and wondering. The view that asks what remains after all the sketches are drawn and all the pages are filled. The night is calm. A candle burns beside an open notebook, but the room no longer feels crowded with possibilities. It feels spacious, settled. The shelves still hold sketches, anatomical studies, mechanical designs, and pages filled with observations gathered across decades. Yet the atmosphere has changed. The work remains. The urgency has softened. Leonardo sits quietly, one hand resting on the edge of the table. Outside the window, the sky stretches dark above the rooftops, and the stars appear with the same distant steadiness they held when he was young. For a long time, he simply watches them. The habit of observation has become inseparable from the habit of living. In his later years, Leonardo spends periods of time in France, under the patronage of Francis I of France. The change of country does not erase the past. Florence remains with him, Milan remains with him, the hills of Vinci remain with him, the notebooks remain with him. They have become a portable landscape of memory. Some evenings he turns through them slowly, not searching for solutions but revisiting moments of attention. A study of a hand recalls hours spent examining tendons and movement. A drawing of water recalls rivers observed from bridges and banks. A sketch of a bird recalls afternoons spent watching flight and wondering how air could carry a body through the sky. The pages preserve more than information. They preserve looking. That may be why they feel alive. A notebook created decades earlier still seems capable of asking questions. A margin note still seems capable of opening another line of thought. The conversation between observer and world continues long after the original moment has passed. One autumn afternoon, light falls across a table scattered with pages from different periods of Leonardo's life. The differences are visible if one looks carefully. Some drawings belong to a younger hand, energetic and restless. Others belong to later years, slower perhaps, but often deeper in their observation. Yet the underlying impulse remains recognizable. Curiosity. Not the excitement of novelty alone, but the persistent desire to understand. Throughout his life, people have called him many things: painter, engineer, inventor, architect, scientist, thinker. The labels describe parts of his work, but none fully capture the thread running through all of them. The thread is attention. Leonardo notices what others pass by. He notices how water curls around an obstacle, how shadows change across a face, how branches divide, how muscles pull beneath skin, how birds alter the angle of a wing during flight. He notices not because he is searching for fame. He notices because the world itself keeps presenting questions, and he keeps answering with another look. A fire crackles softly nearby. The room smells faintly of paper, ink, and wood smoke. Leonardo closes one notebook and rests his hand on the cover for a moment. Thousands of pages, thousands of observations, and still, no final theory that explains everything. No single key unlocking every mystery. Perhaps this once seemed like a failure waiting to be solved. Now it begins to resemble a truth. The world may be larger than any system built to contain it. The realization is not discouraging. It is strangely peaceful. One winter evening, snow drifts past the window in slow, silent patterns. Leonardo watches the flakes descend. Each one follows its own path. Each movement differs slightly from the next. The scene would have fascinated the younger man for its geometry and motion. It fascinates the older man as well, but now another layer is present. Transience. The flakes fall, settle, melt, disappear. Observation preserves a moment. Life continues moving. This awareness seems to enter the notebooks more frequently in later years. Not as sorrow, more as perspective. A sketch captures only one instant. A measurement records only one state. Nature continues changing before, during, and after the page is written. Understanding becomes less about possession and more about participation. To observe a river is not to own the river. To study a bird is not to own flight. To draw a hand is not to exhaust the mystery of being human. The page records a meeting between attention and reality, nothing more, nothing less. Late at night, when the household has gone quiet, Leonardo sometimes walks slowly between the shelves. Moonlight enters through the windows and touches stacks of notebooks, loose sheets, and wooden models gathered across a lifetime. The room feels almost like a memory made physical. He pauses beside a pile of anatomical studies, then beside sketches of machines, then beside drawings of plants and flowing water. Different subjects, different decades. Yet viewed together they reveal a single habit of mind. Follow the question wherever it leads. Many of those paths remain unfinished. Some designs were never built. Some paintings were never completed. Some investigations end mid-sentence. The unfinished work no longer seems accidental. It seems inevitable. Curiosity outran completion. Every answer opened another door. Every discovery enlarged the territory beyond it. The notebooks show a man repeatedly arriving at the edge of what he knows and choosing to keep walking. That choice may be the most consistent fact of his life. One spring morning, sunlight warms the room as Leonardo studies a page filled with branching forms. Rivers, trees, blood vessels, roots. Variations of the same pattern appear across different contexts. He traces one line with his finger and smiles faintly. The world repeats itself, not mechanically but rhythmically. Structures echo across scales. Movements echo across systems. The recognition does not solve every mystery. It simply reveals another layer of coherence. For decades he has been collecting such moments, small glimpses of order inside complexity. The notebooks become a mosaic of these glimpses. No single piece explains the whole image. Together they suggest that the world is both intelligible and inexhaustible. Even now, with years of observation behind him, Leonardo still encounters things he cannot fully explain. The persistence of mystery no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like the condition that makes curiosity possible. A completely explained world would offer no invitation to look closer. This world keeps inviting. The candle burns lower. Shadows lengthen across the table. Leonardo writes a few final notes before setting the pen down. The page remains unfinished, but the unfinished line no longer demands immediate completion. Some questions can wait. Some questions may outlive the questioner. He seems to understand that now. Outside, the night deepens. The stars continue their silent movement above the darkened landscape. Somewhere beyond the window, water flows through channels and rivers exactly as it did when he first watched streams near Vinci. Birds will rise with morning light. Trees will branch and leaf again. Human faces will continue carrying expressions that no sketch can fully contain. The world remains larger than any notebook. Leonardo closes the page gently. For a moment he sits without moving, listening to the quiet around him. The shelves, the papers, the unfinished studies, the famous works, the forgotten experiments, all of it belongs to the same long conversation. A conversation between a human being and the world he spent a lifetime observing. The answers were never complete. The questions never disappeared. And somewhere between them, in the soft candlelight of countless nights, Leonardo da Vinci found the work that mattered most, not conquering mystery, but remaining willing to meet it with attention, patience, and wonder.